So the advantages of the systems thinking approach. Lewe, Atkinson, and I are going to be talking about all of the advantages to using the systems thinking approach in planning. And there's quite a few of them, so there's going to be 2 different sessions.
Hello, Valerie. How are you?
I'm good, Lewe. I'm thrilled you're here. I appreciate that. You
don't sound as thrilled as you could be. I guess it's lockdown, isn't it?
It is. So we're going to be talking about these 6 advantages in this session, and we're going to be talking about another 7 advantages in our second session.
Oh, and there are many more, Valerie, but I think we'll constrain ourselves to this many to start with.
So my favorite is, by using the systems thinking approach, we reduce unintended consequences. And I wish we had known about this when I was in a large corporation, because we did really good stuff, but we were often surprised when there was opposition to it. And if we would have used the systems thinking approach, we would have brought people into the system sooner, heard about their issues, heard about their opposition, and co-designed with them.
Yeah, we use a planning model, Valerie, that I'm sure you'll share shortly. And at the very heart of the systems thinking approach to strategic planning is this thing called the parallel stakeholder involvement process. And that's about getting together with people who will be impacted or affected by the change as early as possible in the planning process and work with them to anticipate some of these short and long-term issues that will arise through planning.
And also taking a look at the consequences, we can actually predict what some of the long and short-term results of the system could be, which isn't always possible if you're doing traditional strategic planning, because you're not taking a look at all of the consequences and thinking that far in advance.
Indeed. And of course, when you think about an organization as a system, when we talk about systems and the notion of holism associated with systems, that the whole has properties that are more than the sum of the individual parts, shifting the focus onto the whole is a really important part of anticipating what's going to be the impact of a future plan or implementation of the plan.
Very true. Okay, let's talk about current state assessment.
Well, the thing that attracts me to the systems thinking approach to strategic planning is the idea that we don't start with a current state assessment. That's, about halfway through the process that we encourage people to use. We start with the end in mind. So we start with the future state, our desired outcomes, and the purpose served by those desired outcomes. And in a strategic planning context, that means things like vision, mission, and values.
Yeah. I think one of the really different things about starting with the future and not starting with the current state is that when you gather information for the current state, you're doing it with respect to that future. So if you've come up with a big change or a pivot that your organization is making, you're gathering information around, can we do that? Do we have the ability to do that? What skills do we need to do that? Do we have the bandwidth to do that? If you didn't know about that big change that was happening in the organization, you might just create your current state assessment information and gather it based on the old future that you're working towards or the current situation you're working at right now.
Yeah, more of the same. Moss is probably what you end up with if you stay in the current state without being mindful of where you're trying to get to. So when we work in the current state data collection process, what we're actually doing is gathering data or information about where we are now as the baseline to contrast to where we want to be, which is obviously the future state, where we want to take the organization or entity that we're doing the planning for. And then, of course, the planning development and execution is closing that gap between where we want to be and where we are now. So that closing the gap and getting to where we want to be.
So another thing I really like about the systems thinking approach is it's an iterative process, and you make a change to your current state assessment, or because of something that you might find out about in the next phase, or you might do something in your current state assessment, do some gathering, and realize you might actually stretch that future out a little bit more. So it's an iterative process. It isn't a straight line. You gather information, you have discussions, you talk to people, and you might go, whoa, let's go back here and make these changes. So it's nothing's casting stone, nothing's, in concrete. It really is that iterative process where you go back and you update it and you make sure that it's the best plan possible.
Yeah, and the famous Canadian, I think, like yourself, Valerie, as at Mintzberg, I think is the name of the strategist.
Mm-hmm.
He talked about this notion of intended versus realized strategy. And of course, what we plan is what we intend to achieve. So the desired future state. And of course, reality is that the realized strategy is never exactly the same as the intended strategy that we plan to implement. And that's why this iterative approach is so crucial, because we're constantly referring back to where we plan to be versus where we are now and adjusting accordingly, because that pesky old external environment outside the organization that we're working with is always changing as well. And that's going to impact on our capacity to get to where we want to go. So iteration and doing it frequently is really critical. And in the context of strategy development, we like to say that a strategic plan is never implemented. What actually gets done is an annual action plan based on that agreed strategic direction. So at least we're reviewing or iterating annually, and obviously more frequently as the rate of change in the external environment dictates us to do that.
Right. And I like that we have quite a few tools that check and make sure that the parts support each other and fit together. And if they don't, you can go back in the process and iterate and update and refine. So future scanning, I like these pictures. They are both bridges, but they're bridges in totally different environments. And all systems are open to an external environment. We're always impacted by that environment in which we operate. So we need to be scanning for the future environment, what trends could be happening. And in systems thinking approach, we make sure that we scan the environment not once, but continually, because you were just talking about how that environment, pesky environment, can impact us and have us make changes and pivot and have to update the plan so that we are moving towards our goals within the environment that we're working within.
Yes, Valerie, and again, using the systems thinking approach to planning, one of the things that we encourage people to think about is their entity or their organization as a part of the environment within which they're operating. So in other words, what we often say is that an organization, a company, government department, whatever, is designed to serve its external environment. And in that case, it would be citizens and customers. So your way of being inside your organization should be totally defined by what's happening in the external environment, including those who you serve. And of course, those needs change over time as your customer base or the community that you're working within changes. So scanning forward is really important to enable you to the best of your ability to anticipate what you may need to adjust to. And of course, within that is also the capacity to do scenario development, which may then allow you to anticipate which way to turn in terms of your strategy, and be ready to implement that.
I also think that some people think future scanning, you only look for negative things or all trends are negative, and it's not that way at all. Lots of people will see a trend and leverage it and take advantage of it, and others, are almost swamped by it. So when I think of future scanning like surfing, a big wave comes, you have to do certain things to get in the right position to ride the wave, or else you're going to get swamped by it.
And one of our global partners, Karen Anderson, who specialises in risk and integration of strategic risk into the systems thinking approach to strategic planning, interestingly defines risk as both a negative and a positive. How dare us be risking being successful, more successful than we anticipated, as in contrast to risk always being a negative thing. Either way, you need to prepare for the unexpected.
Very true. So Louis, I think one of the best things about systems thinking is it can really take something that's complex, hard to understand, frustrating, like this poor guy probably working on a very long strategic planning process. But the systems thinking approach allows you to simplify really complex things down to one page, to a few concepts. And I think that's really what simplicity is about.
Yeah, you're right, Valerie. And I guess part of the risk here in terms of oversimplifying things is that we actually don't use systems thinking and focus on the parts rather than the whole. So that notion of defining a whole system as being the sum of its parts is in itself a simplifying concept, because then what you're doing is always focusing on what's in the best interests of the whole organization rather than optimizing the individual parts. And of course, just by doing that, you've reduced the number of moving parts. And of course, the other thing that's quite a concept that simplifies things is you're focusing on the customer, the recipient, or the purpose that you're serving as a system. And if you keep that lens on and make decisions in that context within your organization, it makes decision making a lot simpler, I feel.
Right. And using the systems thinking approach, we can simplify, but we also make sure we have all the details and the analysis and all the background. You need both. Right.
Both and, Valerie, is our mantra, isn't it? Both and, not either or. That's a really powerful systems thinking mindset.
And flexibility. You want to talk a little bit about flexibility, Louis?
Well, you can see the team there furiously working in a scrum, which is part of that agile concept that was born out of software development, but now has become much more pervasive across corporate and other spheres of strategic planning. And one of the things we like about the idea of organizational structures adopting the systems thinking approach to strategic planning is that we have this idea of cascading the purpose of the organization down through the organizational layers to the individual performance level and the individual's at least annual and probably more frequent performance planning reviews. We use exactly the same model at that individual level as we do at the whole of organization level, because the achievement of the individual is interpreted within the context of the overarching success of the organization. And that not only gives the individual line of sight to their contribution to success, but just as importantly, it gives them a level of delegation to take responsibility for decision making at the level they're working at as well. And therein lies the flexibility, Valerie, what we call strategic consistency, but operational flexibility at that level of decision making.
Right. So it's flexible because it can be used at all levels and all types of planning, whether it's land use planning or lifestyle planning or whatever, project planning, flexible in types of planning, all levels, and giving people at the operational level that decision making because they have the local knowledge. So we can optimize their abilities and their information.
That's right.
And finally, this is the system.
Wow. A very familiar system to many, I'm sure, Valerie, but you can again imagine the levels that are operating within this ecosystem of a forest, down to the microbial species living in the soil that's influencing the roots of the trees and the trees themselves and the other vegetation at the feet of the tree are influenced by the way the tree captures sunlight and prevents others from getting access to it, and other nutrients in the soil, of course, all the way through to it being part of a forest. And of course, being influenced by the presence of other trees nearby, and then maybe even the insects that move between those trees and helping them spread the genetics of the species throughout the forest as well. So a very complex, many-leveled ecosystem that leads us to reflect on that metaphor, trying to see the forest for the trees, but often being distracted by the detail and missing out on the beauty of the whole ecosystem and how it all works. Systems thinking, the systems thinking approach at work there, Valerie.
And I love that the systems thinking approach allows us to see the forest and the trees.
And of course, the interrelationship between each of the subsystems within the forest all contribute to what we experience as the ecosystem of the whole forest. And indeed, to the extent to which that can then influence the climate, the microclimate in the area of the forest is a really quite a powerful concept as well. And indeed, there's no doubt a system of human beings and getting access to this forest, if it's a state forest or a national asset, and the system that enables people to enjoy something like this beautiful natural resource that we can see here, Valerie. Is this near your place at all in Canada?
Yes, it is, I believe. Yep. So thank you, Louis. Great talking to you as usual. I look forward to our second session.
Thank you. Looking forward to it too, Val.
Take
Bye.
care.